Chris McDonald, Great Smoky Mountain Journal News Network, on this Tuesday, December the 6th, 2017. We're so proud today to have a gentleman named Blake Perceval. Him and his wife live in Alabama, but it's what Blake was involved with and did a few years ago that's the reason that we've got him on our program today. And it's a very serious matter, to be honest with you. Just to give you a little background before we bring Blake in, he worked with a company called USIS or USIS. It was a company created by Congress in 1996. It was under the Office of Personnel Management. Now, the OPM is one of the most powerful offices probably in Washington, and it was at the time under President Obama. It was the same office and company that was handling such tasks as managing the Affordable Care Act, which we all know how that has turned out. But they also were involved with handling national security clearances, which involved anyone that would work with the government, anyone that would look at high-level documents, anyone that would have any kind of reason to get a national security clearance. And this company was actually in charge of performing the federal background checks. And because of some of the things they were doing that was not right, and Blake, in standing up to that, basically put him and the company on a very rough confrontation, and it turned out good in the end for Blake, but in the short term, things got really bad. And Blake, I hope I've summed that up as good as I could. It's so good to have you on our program today, and we're really excited to talk to you about what took place with USIS and where we're at today with our national security. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Chris. I enjoy coming on shows like yours and sharing, what I did, what I went through, and what God's done for me.
That's great. I'm going to let you go ahead and tell the people a little bit, just pick it up where I left off, and if you want to fill in any blanks about USIS and what the company does, you go ahead and just tell folks from the start where you started working with them, and then how all this came about, and then we'll get into some questions and go from there.
Okay. Well, I started working with USIS after a fairly lengthy career in law enforcement as a police officer. I had also served in the military, and I think that by being in our military, seeing honor and integrity firsthand, that it instilled in me those things, and having grown up in a Christian home in the South, going to church every time the doors were open, I have a strong sense of morals and integrity and honor. And anyway, in 2001, after working as a police officer, I went to work for a company called USIS. Funny, when I applied to USIS, I actually applied to a posting I saw online to do background investigations for the federal government. And I was applying to the Office of Personnel Management, Office of Federal Investigation. But when I was contacted about the job, it was a private company contacting me. And that company at the time was called U.S. Investigation Services. They later were renamed USIS or USIS. And so they contacted me, and I went through the hiring process with them. I had to be within our government top secret level. And USIS, while it was a private company, had actually been formed by an act of Congress in 1996 when Congress, under the Clinton-Gore administration, attempted to privatize part of government to streamline supposedly operations and decrease government costs. Anyway, so I went to work for USIS in January of 2001, and I worked in the Montgomery, Alabama area as a field investigator. And what a field investigator with USIS did was, the federal government, anytime they want to hire somebody, they have the person fill out a job application, but then they also have them fill out a security questionnaire. And there's two different types of those. One is just, a security questionnaire to make sure that, there's nothing in your background that would make you not suitable for a government position. But then there's a second type of application, and that's for a security clearance. And the form used for that is called SF-86. The form used for the, just to look into your background
right,
is an SF-85P. But anyway, you would fill out that paperwork, and it would go to the Office of Personnel Management, and then the Office of Personnel Management would send it over to USIS, and the company that you were going to go to work for, or like a contracting company for the government, or the federal agency, would then pay OPM to look into your background. Well, OPM didn't do those investigations themselves. They had USIS, which had been created by Congress. And so when I was a field investigator in Montgomery, Alabama, anywhere within about a 100-mile radius of Montgomery, that the government was hiring someone, or that the government had determined that this person needed to see classified material and they needed a security clearance, I would go out and talk to the person. I would go out and talk to their neighbors. I would go to the places they had worked, the universities and educational institutions they had gone to, and pull the records and look into the person's background for about the last 10 years of their life to determine if this was the type of person that should be working for the government, or if they were, a risk to the government.
Sure.
Should they be allowed to see federal documents? So anyway, so I did that with USIS for about 2.5 years, and then as young men and fathers do, I was trying to progress my career to allow me and my wife to have a better life and,
Sure.
and make things better. And I had worked at multiple police departments, and each time I would change police departments, it was because I was looking for a better life for my family and better income, better benefits, that kind of thing. So after being with USIS for about 2.5 years, I applied to get into management with them. And the particular position that was open was over what was called the Raleigh district. And it was basically the state of North Carolina, but the office for it was in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And anyway, I moved to Virginia Beach, Virginia, and I worked there for a couple years as the district manager over Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and Pope Air Force Base and the Joint Special Operations Command there. And, anybody that needed a government security clearance, their security clearance would come across my desk, and I would make sure that the investigators locally throughout North Carolina that should be working that clearance got the information they needed to do the investigation. So I did that for a couple of years, and then I was offered a lateral transfer back to Alabama. I came back to Alabama and pretty much worked where I had worked as an investigator, but this time I was over the investigators in Central Alabama. I did that for a couple of years, and then I was offered a position in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And let me just tell you, if you want somebody from Montgomery, Alabama to move to Minneapolis, Minnesota, you need to send them there in the springtime. and that's what they did.
I got it.
They sent me up there in the springtime, and it was beautiful. Everything was budding out, no snow. And anyway, we got involved in the community up there, and I ended up being over 117 investigators in the upper Midwest. I was over 5.5 states, 370,000 square miles. If the government wanted to know about somebody's background, anywhere from the western border of North and South Dakota all the way over to just about Chicago, from the Canadian border down to the southern border of Iowa, it came across my desk, and I made sure that an investigator went out and conducted that investigation. So the next piece of the puzzle in these security clearances is that once the investigation is done, it is sent to a central processing place where a reviewer looks at the security clearance request, looks at what this particular person's level of clearance needs to be, and looks at what the congressional mandates and laws are that apply to this person, and as to whether or not they meet those requirements based on the investigation that's taken place. And this reviewer makes sure that everything that needed to be done, every check that needed to be checked, was done.
Right.
The reviewer then, they don't mark, they passed their background investigation. What they mark is that everything was done, and they send it to the government for it to be processed. Well, after being in Minneapolis for about 4.5 years, I was called by our upper management at USIS and offered the position as the director of the facility that would process all of these clearances. So this was January of 2011. And so I began the move from Minneapolis to the western Pennsylvania areas. My office was actually in Grove City, Pennsylvania. It was a 40,000 square foot office, 350 employees, wall-to-wall cubicles. I like to call it Cubicle City. And so I'm in the middle of the move there, but I knew that coming into that organization, I needed to know what the problems were, and the best way to do that is talk to the frontline employees. So I began having small meetings with the employees, sometimes just 2 or 3 employees, sometimes as many as 10 or 15. And I would ask them basically just 2 questions. What do you like about your job? What do you not like about your job? What do you hate about your job? And then based on what they tell me, I would take notes. And what they would tell me they liked about the job, I would accent, or I would, make better.
Sure. Sure.
Whatever they're liking, that's what you want to accentuate. And then what they told me they didn't like, I would try to address those problems. And by and large, I was getting the same answers from everybody. As far as what you like about your job, everybody, when I would ask that question, would pretty much metaphorically pull out an American flag and wave it and talk about how that they liked that we were a line of defense for the United States and we helped protect our country's secrets and our national security. Well, that was pretty standard answers that I was getting from everybody. And then when I asked, what do you hate about your job? It was the same thing. I was getting the same type of answers from everybody, very different from what they liked, but I would get things like, I don't like that the carpets are dirty here in the office. I don't like that, I have to work so much overtime. It was, from a management standpoint, it was things that I could address. And I began addressing those things. But when it got time when I got to the point of interviewing the 2 senior managers that, if I wasn't in this facility, ran things, I had them in my office and I posed the same 2 questions. And when I asked the question, what do you hate about your job? One of those employees blurted out, I hate that we dump cases.
Gotcha. And let me just interject that the dumping, when you say the word dump, that's basically that they don't follow through with the correct process. Is that sort of correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I'll explain it briefly.
Go ahead.
But when she said that, I didn't even know what she meant. I didn't know what dumping was. I had spent my entire 10 years with the company out in the field doing investigations and overseeing investigations. I was just learning what the reviewers do in this facility. And so when I was told that we had a process called dumping, I said, what do you mean? And this senior employee began explaining to me that near the end of the month, each month, this company had a process. I guess I need to back up. Most businesses set a budget, and then they follow that budget, and you can, kind of like a household does. And so at the beginning of the year, you had a yearly budget, and then you had a quarterly budget, and then you had a monthly budget. Well, in this instance, USIS had begun as a federal agency. Then it was privatized, and when it was privatized, it was an employee stock ownership plan. The employees owned USIS. A couple years down the road from privatization, USIS was actually purchased by a private equity firm, and it then was sold to another private equity firm, and then it was sold to another private equity firm. I'll throw this in. One of the private equity firms that bought USIS right around the time of 9/11, one of the major investors in that private equity firm was the Bin Laden family.
Wow.
And so you could see, some a privatization of our national security may or may not be a good thing.
Exactly.
But anyway,
bureaucrats think it always is, though, Blake, for some reason, and that's the craziest thing, because you're playing with the lives of millions of people when they do that.
You're dead on, and you just, some things, from my perspective, are inherently government. But then again, so this company had been sold numerous times, and at the time that I was working in this brand new position, it was actually owned by the largest private equity firm in the world, Providence Equity Partners, or also known as PIP. And, you know, they are a financial backer. They backed USIS and the holding company that owned USIS, known as Integrity, and they expected a return on their money. And so there were financial budgets set for USIS at the beginning of the year, and then checked on each quarter and checked on each month. And what I was learning when she was describing the dumping process was that at the beginning of the month, the company's upper management knew how much money USIS needed to make that month to meet budget. They also knew how many cases, they knew how much they were paid for each case that they would deliver to the government. And therefore, it was an easy mathematical equation to figure out how many cases they needed to deliver to meet budget.
Right.
And as the end of the month approached, they would direct that number of cases to be released to the government, whether they had been completed, whether they had been reviewed or not. And that process was called dumping. And so if at the beginning of the month they determined that 4,000 cases needed to go to the government in order to meet budget, if throughout the course of the month 2,600 had been properly investigated and delivered to the government, then at the end of the month, last few days, they would begin dumping cases to get to the 4,000 case mark.
Wow. So, and your job was basically to oversee all this. And when you first heard about this, this was basically the first time you had heard that something like this was going on, correct?
Absolutely. And, you know, and when she told me we had a process called dumping, and I had no idea what it was, and so I asked her to explain it to me, and when she did explain it to me, I think I was actually sitting there with my mouth open. I couldn't believe that this company, that not only me, but the rank and file employee at this company had no idea of what was going on. I was shocked. I was blown away, but I believe that I was put in that position to stop it.
Gotcha. I believe you were too, Blake. I do. And
yeah, and I've always believed that, you know, when you are in a leadership position, the buck stops here. And I am so very thankful that I was prepared in my morals and values and integrity for that particular moment, because it appears that it'll be the moment that I'm remembered for.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's where this story really becomes interesting, though, because knowing all this, and you've brought us to the point where you found out about the dumping, you took this to your supervisors, and I'm assuming those would be higher-ups in the federal government, probably, and we're talking White House level, or how high did this go when you first tried to tell people what was going on?
Well, actually what happened was when she told me, I looked her square in the eyes and said, as of this moment, we don't dump. If anybody tells you to dump, direct them to me. So her direction to dump was coming from our upper management within the company, which was in Falls Church, Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C.
Right.
And anyway, that was mid to late January of 2011. That, of course, put me on a collision course with upper management in the company, and I received, you know, numerous orders directly to me to resume the dumping process, which I never did. And by June of 2011, I was terminated from the company. I was, you know, I was very proud of what career I had built, and I was very proud of what I thought we did for the government within this company. And it was quite demoralizing to me the day that I was hired. I held a top secret security clearance with the U.S. government. I held a badge and credential that identified me as a federal investigator, and my badge and credential were seized from me, and I was walked out of this facility in front of the employees that I had, you know, just become their boss a few months earlier, like I was a criminal.
Wow.
And yet what was going on was I was the only person in the management of this facility that was saying, no, I won't commit fraud. This organization, basically, I read somewhere, I'm not sure if it was a Washington Post article, but somewhere where you were indirectly tied to
you're not you, but the USIS group you work for, to the Snowden clearance. Is that correct? I mean, they had sort of overlooked his, and look what he's wound up being, one of the, he's been a whistleblower. How did the Snowden connection work into this group?
Yeah, let me get to that.
Okay.
And there's a book coming in all this too, by the way. So anyway, so after they walked me out, they actually had me meet with a member of Human Resources in a parking lot, and they offered me a severance package. And they were willing to pay me just to go away, but if I signed the severance package, I agreed not to tell anybody why I left. And so I couldn't stomach that. For me, they fired me because we wouldn't dump, and then they're trying to pay me to just go away and not tell anybody.
Gotcha.
So me and my family went back to Montgomery, Alabama, where we were from, and after a 4.5-year battle in court, I ended up coming out, victorious, and USIS was put out of business. Let me back up just a second. So in June of 2011 is when I was terminated. The government then, when you file a whistleblower complaint, they investigate your claim, and they do that under seal, so nobody knows who the person is that came forward. And they did that in my case, and that just seemed to drag on and drag on and drag on. And the government was never stepping forward and saying, well, Mr. Perceval's got a valid claim here, although it was evident from day one that, if I'm the guy in charge of this process and I'm telling you what's going on there,
sure,
unless I'm
exactly.
just out and out lying, that's what's going on.
Exactly.
So anyway, the government didn't take any action on my case for right at 2 years, and in June of 2013, Edward Snowden ran off from the United States and took with him our national security secrets, some of them. And Congress started having hearings about that. And while they were having their hearings, I remember the Claire McCaskill,
yes,
Congresswoman from Missouri. Mm-hmm. She asked a question of the OPM Inspector General, and that question was, do you have any concerns about the background investigation that was done on Edward Snowden? And his reply was that he had concerns with the company that conducted the investigation because they had been under investigation since 2011.
Wow.
And he was referring to my case. So Edward Snowden's background investigation was done by USIS. And so even after these congressional hearings, the government still didn't intervene in my case, and that's what it's called when the government decides there is merit to your case and they take your case over. But then in September of 2013, just 3 months later, a guy by the name of Aaron Alexis went to the Navy Yard in Washington, D.C., and he murdered 12 people and then committed suicide.
I remember that.
And it ended up that his clearance was also done by
Wow.
USIS. And both of those clearances were processed during the time period that the federal government said USIS was dumping cases, because the process of dumping cases had been going on long before I got there. But the shocking part for me is that I told the federal government when I filed my whistleblower case, it was filed July 1st of 2011. I told the federal government what was going on, and then according to the government's documents when they took over my case, they had to file their complaint against USIS, and they said in that document that the dumping took place from early 2008 until late 2012. So the shocking part for me is they knew about it July of 2011, but they didn't stop it until late 2012.
Like this thing costs people's lives. I mean, these people that you just mentioned, both Snowden and this gentleman up in, he's not a gentleman, this killer up in the D.C. area, had they had the proper vetting and had the proper security clearances given to them, they very likely would not have been involved in the government to begin with, correct?
That is entirely possible, absolutely. And, when I first started sharing my story, which that's something I do, I go to go to churches and civic organizations and share my story, because I think it's a story of doing the right thing and winning. When I first started sharing it, had trouble getting through the part of talking about Aaron Alexis without crying, because I feel like had the government acted on the information I gave them when I gave it to them, that it very well may not have happened.
Wow. And that is always what infuriates most people about these kind of cases, is when you look back on them and you see the trail of all the red flags, you see the trail of the bureaucracy, you see the trail of red tape that could have prevented these things from happening. And then in the wake of lives being lost, and it does as a both a citizen and as an individual out here who values life, we just shake our head at this, because this is our government at work, and it's terrible that they allow this practice to go on for so long. Let me ask you a couple of questions about what happened. I noticed that in the article, the Washington Post article, that was very informative. This firing really puts you guys in a very tough financial place. And I was reading one paragraph where you said you had gotten down to like $54 in your bank account, living basically from you hoping to get to the next paycheck. And then when this settlement, take us to how you got the lawsuit, and what the government actually wound up settling with you with, and tell the folks that part of this story.
Sure. So, no matter what amount of money you're making in this life, most people seem to live at that level. And as our income had gone up and up and up, and our positions had taken me higher and higher at police departments and then at USIS, we were living a better and a better life, and it was no problem to carry a certain level of debt because we made a certain level of income. But then when I'm walked out of a facility and I go from making six figures plus a 20% bonus each year, a company SUV, a corporate direct build American Express, a company BlackBerry, all these benefits went away instantaneously. And, not only that, we were in the middle of a move. So I was stretched out. I had a house in Minneapolis, Minnesota that was on the market, hadn't sold yet. I was living in a corporate apartment. And I think how strung out the company had me might be one reason that they thought I wouldn't tell anybody.
Right.
Because,
right.
If you want to think about, the old coal mining days, they were expecting me to spend that script they were giving me instead of money. I found myself in just a matter of days from going from that cushy job to not knowing how I was going to feed my family. We ended up, through the grace of God, never missing a bill that we owed. But I did work 3 jobs in order to pull that off. I stocked shelves in a grocery store at midnight. I worked as a magistrate for the city of Montgomery, Alabama, on the overnight shift. I went to work for another investigative company as an investigator, a ground level entry position. And I would get off at one job and go to the other one. And, sometimes scrambling to find time to sleep. And my wife, stocked shelves with me at midnight at a grocery store in Montgomery, Alabama.
Wow.
And we struggled, but God was always faithful. And
sure,
one thing
sure.
that the Washington Post liked telling this part of it, when we were working at this grocery store, there was a time when we didn't eat, we paid our bills and money was tight, and we didn't know how we were going to buy groceries. And this grocery store offered us the meat that was expiring, the meat that
wow.
had expired, and my family survived on that. And while that might sound gross to a lot of people, when you don't have enough to put food on the table and somebody offers you an expired pork loin that's the best pork loin you ever sunk your teeth into.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And, Blake, this is the thing that strikes me about this interview already, and this is why I commend you more than you'll ever know, because, look, it takes courage to do what you did, first of all. It takes courage to stand up and see a wrong and know good and well that when you do the right thing, that there's not going to be a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow for you sometimes. This situation turned out a lot better than you probably could ever imagine. But, you didn't know that at the time. I mean, when you were taking that meat from that grocery store, I mean, it probably felt like a wilderness. And, and I know, look, I'm a person of faith, and I know how the enemy works, and I can almost imagine the whispers of the enemy into your ear. You should have just kept your mouth shut. You should have let this go on. This was not worth losing your money over. This was not worth putting your family through. And in reality, Blake, you may have saved hundreds, possibly thousands of lives, because these holes in these national security clearances, you're talking about people that could have had terrorist backgrounds. You're talking about people that could have had mental disorders. These people, these shooters that are going on these rampages across our country. I mean, these are people that the government of the United States of America was allowing to look at national security documents, work for the government that handles things that affect every citizen in this nation. And it's a courageous thing that you did.
Wow.
And I believe that.
Thank you, and I hope that what I did made a difference. You can't be responsible for what other people are doing, but you can be responsible for what you're doing, and you can you can handle things the way God expects you to handle them in an upright and moral way. And to me, when I was faced with this I didn't even have to participate in the fraud. All I had to do was look the other way.
Exactly.
But it wasn't right. It wasn't moral. It wasn't what was best for our country. And for me, I'm a firm believer that, I was raising a family, and my children are looking at me every day. And for me to be telling them out of one side of my mouth how to live their life, and then living a different way out of the other side, I just couldn't do that. And it was more important for me that when we sit down for a meal, that I'm able to look across the table at them and know that I'm living out the values that I tell them to live. That was more important for me than any material possession I could give them. And I'll also tell you this: when I accepted the job with USIS and made the move to Western Pennsylvania, I didn't know God's plan for my life, and I'm very thankful that I didn't, because had I known it at that point, I'm not sure I could have gone through with it.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't think most people out here listening to this interview probably, if they really take a hard look at their heart and life and they look in the mirror, I'm not sure too many people would have had the courage to do what you did. I mean, because, you're talking about a bureaucracy in Washington, and we're seeing this play out, Blake. And what we're going to do, I'm going to let you tell your story, and then I'm going to make a part 2 of this interview to sort of break this up a little bit. We're going to go another about 10 minutes, and then I'm going to come back and we're going to talk about some current matters. But what I'm saying here is that the bureaucracy that we know as the deep state, that's the term that most people are using right now, it's got some claws. It's got some real mean individuals in it. And I can only imagine, I mean, you were doing this during a time that we had a government in place that was very corrupt, I believe. I know that I'd probably get some disagreement on that from some folks, but I don't think that there's ever been a more corrupt government than the Obama administration that we've ever had in place. I know that not every nobody has been perfect. I know this administration we've got now is not perfect, but they are at least trying to do the right thing in so many areas, and I think the Lord's blessing them for it, and I think He's blessing our president for it. I was looking at this figure right here: 665,000 security clearances were not done properly by this group, and that's what you helped stop. That's an amazing number. That's not a few. That's a lot of security clearances, Blake.
It is, and the part about that for for me that's shocking is of that 665,000, we only know who two of them were, Edward Snowden and Aaron Alexis. There are 664,998 people out there that have been granted a security clearance, that their security clearance was processed improperly. And personally, me, as an American citizen, I'd like to know who they are, and I'd like to know that the government went back and made sure they deserved a security clearance, and that has not taken place.
Do you think there are terrorists in that group?
I think that if you look at just, recent headlines, recent happenings in the United States, and the fact that terrorists are actively trying to get into not just our country but our government, I think there's a high probability that one of 665,000 people would be a person that meant us harm. I mean, the two individuals that we talked about that have been identified were both American citizens, and let's face it, you have to be an American citizen to get a security clearance. But the chances of one of these 665,000 people being a terrorist, I mean, the odds are, yes, that there's at least one in there.
Well, as we get to this part of the interview about what happened, I want you to tell the people, because there was a good ending to this story about what happened to you, and tell the people the case goes to court. The Justice Department, the Congress take the whole situation into consideration. It finally gets to court. You get word from your attorney, unfortunately, that USIS had filed bankruptcy, which may not have mattered a whole lot. If they filed bankruptcy, they were not sure what kind of award you were going to get. And but then the Justice Department still pressed the case and still went on with it. And you got a favorable ruling, I believe, from one of the judges that did not preclude you from collecting damages. And tell the people what happened and what finally came to your household, and as a form of a blessing from all this trouble that you went through for standing up and doing the right thing.
Yeah, so the way security clearances, the way whistleblower cases work, they're actually called key tam cases, and that's interesting all in of itself. Key tam cases were actually started, the idea of having a key tam system was started by Abraham Lincoln. And it was started during the Civil War when profiteers were selling stuff to the federal government that wasn't any good. Cannons that didn't work, gunpowder that wouldn't fire. And so what they set up was a system where if the government's able to recoup money, then the person that brought them that allegation and claim is entitled to a percentage. And the way that it works now is whoever brings a key tam case is entitled to 15 to 30% of what the government recoups. And in my instance, the government recouped a little over $30 million, and they awarded me 20%.
So you got about $6 million came to your household, and they actually wired that money to you, correct?
That's correct. But that number's before, believe it or not, they take their taxes back, and I have to pay the lawyers. So, let's just say Blake Perceval will never have to work for another man.
Oh, I understand that. We won't you don't have to give us the exact figure. But what you said made me laugh, because they always say, Blake, death, taxes, and everything else under the sun are about the two common denominators in life. I think that's when people die, I've got a feeling that Uncle Sam, somewhere in the audience, there's probably got some ghost agent out there at everybody's funeral in this world, making sure that the money is taxed before they go out.
Isn't it a whole new wrinkle, though, that I bring them $30 million, they give me an award, and then they want part of it back?
They want part of it back. That's our government at work for you. I will share one touching thing about this, and then we're going to bring this part of the interview to an end, but hang on to the phone, because we're going to come back and do a second part. The wife, when you came home after all this struggle and all this turmoil, she reacted in a very unique way, and I think I'll let you sort of share that. I won't spoil the beans on that, but tell people when you found out you were actually getting this money. Tell the people what you did when you called your wife and what you told her and how she reacted.
Well, I called her on the phone, and I was at work, and I couldn't afford, even though I knew that any second this was going to happen, I couldn't afford to take a day off, and not even the day that they told me it's probably going to end this day. But I called her on the phone and simply asked her, and we got a picture. I mean, this is a week before Christmas, and we had been shopping the night before for our grandchild, and our budget for Christmas was $60.
Wow.
And I called my wife, and I asked her how it felt to be a millionaire. And just to have your life change in such a drastic manner that it's going to be affected for the rest of your life monetarily so quickly. Imagine the emotions.
Oh, I can only imagine, but that's what the Lord did to bless you for doing the right thing, because it's not just Blake. Again, it was a courageous thing, but again, our country's national security was at stake, and this was during that time in 2008, 2012, during the Benghazi situation, during a lot of serious issues that were going on overseas, where the government had let a lot of people down, and there was a lot of questions about the security of our nation against ISIS, and we could get into that. We could spend a whole other program on that, but we're gonna sort of take a pause at this part of the interview. We've been talking to Blake Perceval, a whistleblower that won a huge settlement from a company called USIS, which was part of the Office of Personnel Management under President Obama, which is still in existence today now, but the people in it have changed because of the change of Washington. But he's told you his story of what happened when he stopped the process of what we call dumping and filling out insufficient background checks for nearly 665,000 individuals, including Eric Snowden. Did I say his first name right? Edward. I'm sorry. I'm terrible with names, Blake. It's terrible. I'm surprised I've got yours right this whole interview.
I don't really want to tout his name anyway. So.
Absolutely. And Aaron Alexis, the killer that killed the people at the Washington stockyards back in 2011, 2012. It was awful. Blake, we appreciate it. Stay on to the phone, but we've been talking to Blake Perceval with the Great Smoky Mountain News Journal. We're going to pick this up on the other end of this, on side 2. We're going to ask his opinion about some other things going on in our government right now. And Blake, we appreciate you telling us your story today, and we appreciate you being with the Great Smoky Mountain Journal News Network.